celebrate the stragglers. Hello everyone, thank you for coming tonight. The reason I'm not wearing a jacket is because I'm too hot, so forgive me. My name is Bryan Seymour. I'm the host of the podcast, The ABCs of Heston Russell. A lot of what we'll be talking about tonight is in that podcast, but the much fuller version is in the book that we're here to celebrate and launch, Forging the Will to Fight by Heston Russell, his memoir, his first book. Round of applause for our new author, please. Yes, let's talk first about the origins of the book. Why did you decide to write a book and how did it come about?
I think, well, first and foremost, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Bryan, for giving up his time to host it. And I know how hard it is to give up your time, especially on a wet Friday, so I really appreciate everyone being here. This book has a bit of an origin. I never set about planning on writing a book. A lie, I've written 2 books, The Adventures of Copper, but we won't go into that. But writing about myself and writing a memoir actually came about just in 2021. I just finished lobbying in Canberra, going and door knocking to help win the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. And I was approached by a very big publisher who came to me with a big juicy offer to give me a ghostwriter, give me an advance, and to write my memoir with much more of a leadership focus to it. We completed the first manuscript over the first year. It went to Defence to be edited and all things redacted. And then just as things started to kick off with the ABC, and some of you might remember they released their OnlyFans story about me, the publisher came to me and said that they no longer were willing to support the memoir. Long story short, they couldn't legally pull out, but we negotiated. I got the rights to the book and I spent the last 3 years finishing the book myself. And the book in its full form was probably finished almost 18 months to 2 years ago when Sam and I were living together on the Gold Coast. She got to see a lot of behind the scenes. And this last chapter in particular has taken over a year to finish. And I'm finally so happy to be able to share that. And in self-publishing, I'm allowed to include a lot more things that the publisher perhaps wanted to take out.
Yeah, we'll end with a bit of that. I should mention when we've finished having a chat, we'll do a Q&A. There'll be microphones, so think about the questions you might want to ask Heston. Self-publishing, what's that like? What was that journey like for you?
It's a lot. It's a lot. Again, it's lovely to have that freedom. There are a lot of people in this room that I also need to thank who have helped me in editing the book and helping to flesh out some of the stories as well. This last week I've spent, audio recording the first half of the book. For those who don't know, the book weighs just 1.05 kilos.
It's heavy.
It's girthy. Heavy. It's about 150,000 words. And for someone like me who's a bit of a perfectionist, has a bit of OCD, it's quite difficult to really put down into words sometimes what you want. But I've been so happy with this. And for those who do read the book or listen to the book, I would just simply ask that you read or listen to it completely. I'm not going to call myself an artist, even though I've written a book, but it really is written in a way that it's designed to take you on a journey and help provide a bookend capstone at the end for reflections. And in a way for you to read it and perhaps put yourself in some of the perspective if it was you or if it was someone you didn't know, and just try and objectively think about it. Because even as I was writing through the book myself, there were some stigmas and shame and all sorts of other things that I felt coming up as well. And even reading back through it this last week doing the audiobook, it really is an interesting journey, even for me, to reflect on some of the things that I have done that I think I've otherwise forgotten about, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, that most people just know about the whole ABC saga, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things with writing about yourself, a lot of people are very formal and subjective. Can be a bit boring reading someone's telling of their own story. One of the things I said to Heston, I think about 2 years ago, was you just tell it like you'd tell it to me, in your own voice, and you've certainly done that in this book. It's a fantastic read. So well done, mate.
Thank you.
Writing a memoir is an opportunity to get the record straight, maybe settle a few old scores.
I must admit, I was very privileged to have a guy, Tony Park. He was the ghostwriter that I had for the first year doing the manuscript. And he was really great in saying, hey, don't use this as your chance to, level the scores with someone, or use it as your platform to swing freely at someone, because they don't have the ability to swing back. So it was really interesting going through that, and particularly finishing off myself, to make sure I was trying to do it in this is my opinion, this is my perspective, this is my experience, it doesn't necessarily mean it's correct or the whole truth, if that makes sense. It's just writing it from one perspective. But there is a lot in there. I mean, I even go very hard on myself. People who've read the book have said, hey, there's some things in here that probably would have been better left out if you wanted to run for politics or have a public profile or do things like that. But I think that's a whole part of this journey as well, is and the responsibility I have of people knowing me in some form of a spotlight to show the much more human and much more down-to-earth side and not be afraid of that.
I think increasingly authenticity is the currency in the information age, the current social media age, and you are dripping with authenticity, and this book is dripping with it. So
it's also quite liberating. Like, honestly, once you read my book, come at me. There's nothing else, really. Well, some of you know there's a few more things. But sorry, Mum. But no, it's quite liberating. And that's been, you can imagine, particularly writing your own book, there's the opportunity to paint yourself in a real hero complex if you wanted to. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's really important to tell the actual truth as opposed to what you want people to read or think about you.
Well, you know, interviewing you for the podcast and reading the book, your childhood was far removed from where you've ended up. I guess a lot of us are in the same boat.
Yeah.
And we're going to show a few slides here. You were born in 1985. You were bullied as a kid.
Yeah.
And we're now seeing why. What happened?
That's me and my best mate in high school, my Nintendo 64. Yeah. I mean, I started off as a kid from a very... from a military family. I think that's from us in Fayetteville, North Carolina, wearing my dad's parachute helmet on the left, obviously. And on the right, I was about 13, 14, 5'6", the fat kid at high school, never had a girlfriend, just hated life. And I really go into a lot of that in those early chapters.
And still no girlfriend?
That was good. No, unfortunately not.
Hang on a second. If you look up his wife on social media, I come up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Sue Chrysanthus, my wife, on the news.
Of course, your life changed radically not long after this. You transformed yourself into a very different person. And we're just getting another slide up here. I mean, it talks to the journey of why you joined up and how quickly you found yourself going through the selection course. Yeah,
this is actually pictures from East Timor. So at 17, finished high school, went straight into the military, and then these are pictures from me at 21 years old as a platoon commander in East Timor. And again, a lot of this hasn't really been covered because a lot of the focus has been Afghanistan and a lot of other things. But I still say this was probably one of the most important trips for me that shaped me as a military professional. Most of this trip was me patrolling the streets with my weapon slung. I'd studied Indonesian at the Defence Force Academy, so I spoke Bahasa pretty well. And every Thursday I went and spoke and gave English lessons to the local kids. And just learning to be a diplomat. And this is also one of the very poignant stories in the book, is when I got my first sort of experience with death and suicide, as one of my soldiers took his own life on that deployment in East Timor. And I really take you into a lot of the behind the scenes of what that was like as a 21-year-old commander responsible for this guy losing a soldier not in combat, but to his own hand on deployment at a time, this was 2007, where the conversations around suicide and mental health, particularly in the military, were far less mature than they are today.
How hard was the selection course to become a commando?
Well, that's up next. It's terrible. It's the hardest thing I ever did in my military career, and it's meant to be. And those are fantastic pictures, like being strapped up at night time to a 20-kilo plate that you just have to run up and down for 4 hours carrying, through to feeling like you're going to drown in a pool, through to, carrying terrible things. But for me, that was 2010. I started at 90 kilos, finished at 76 kilos, and from a team of 120, finished with 30. And again, there are 3 or 4 chapters in the book completely dedicated to the commando selection course and me going through it. And a lot of people have written about the SAS selection course, but the commando selection course hasn't really been touched. And I know there's a lot of people in my cohort who have already read it and appreciate a lot of the stories I go into. And in particular, the unique part about writing about this is at the very end of my career, I was then tasked to redesign and run the commando selection course. So I get to take you into a lot more details of some of the mind games and how we broke people down mentally and emotionally. And I had a journalist who wrote a review on the book recently saying, reading those selection chapters was, one of the most confronting parts for me, just reading what you had to go through and thinking if I could do that physically. So it's enjoyable, and it's nice even to sit here these days and remember back to some of those things and think, how the hell did I do that? Because you couldn't pay me to do that these days.
Yeah, and even things like after starving people for hours or days on end, hiding a bit of food and watching from a kilometre away through a telescope to see who will find the food, if they'll share it or eat it themselves.
Yeah.
And then not necessarily condemning them for it either way, but working out what kind of person they are, whether they're going to stick to the mission or they're going to make sure that they can function so they can service the mission, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there were some stories in there, particularly when I sent the manuscript to Defence. They didn't want to include some of the details, but I think it's harmless stuff. Like Kumi in here knows a story about, trying to coax people to withdraw from the selection course with a Big Mac after 3 days of not eating and sleeping. People do. I love that. And particularly for me, from a personal development perspective, what that course puts you through and forces you to learn about yourself is worth its weight in gold.
You could coax me out of here with a Big Mac right now.
There's good canapes here.
You were one of the youngest. Were you the youngest leader of the unit when you started?
At the time, I was the youngest platoon commander to get into the 2nd Commander Regiment. That only lasted about a year or two till a friend came through. But
and then I know you talked about imposter syndrome in the book because you hadn't been deployed to Afghanistan, but then you had your first deployment. We're looking at it now. What was this?
Yeah, I think the enjoyable part of the book is a lot of people know these highlights of my life. Like the first time I went to Afghanistan, I was the personal security officer for Julia Gillard. That's a meeting in there. It's very ironic because, sitting next to her is General Hurley, who was just the Governor General. And there's also Angus Campbell, who was just the Chief of the Defence Force. And I was sort of the only lower ranked person in there. But I also go into the book in a lot of details about what was going through my mind behind the scene. How my first deployment to Afghanistan was with the Prime Minister. I didn't feel like I was good enough. I really had this inferiority complex for so much of my career, comparing how many medals I had on my chest compared to all the other much more senior, much more older, much more alpha, aggressive, arrogant people that were in the Special Forces. And the slow journey that I take you on is how I just slowly got to appreciate, being good at your job, treating people well, focusing on those sort of leadership fundamentals that I was taught back in the day and you learn on the job were much more important and would yield greater dividend than being caught up in the comparison and competition that was otherwise around me. Yeah,
and you had a really good rapport with Julia Gillard.
Yeah, there's a lot. I won't give away all the stories, but there's some good little interactions. There's some funny stories too. Actually, I'm going to leave it for the book. You've got to read it. You've got to read it.
Let's take a look at some combat footage that you recorded in Afghanistan in 2012. Set this up for us.
Just press enter. So this is, we'll talk about a lot of these things. Don't worry, no one gets shot on here, nothing happens. But, this is just sort of one of the missions. This is my helmet camera footage. This is an extraction off a target that we've just gone on to in order to capture a known insurgent. And it'll come in. But yeah, my job, was to run to the back of the helicopter, count everyone on. You'll actually see a guy in blue dress come onto the back of the helicopter. He's actually being escorted by the Afghan partner force. You'll see a little King Charles Cavalier, that was our explosive detection dog, run on. These are the sort of stories and the realities of the missions that were there. And I really try in the chapters where I talk about my deployments to take you through what it was actually like, Certainly there was combat. There was just incredible stories about what we did. And most of our missions were sent to capture people, not to kill people. And all this narrative about war crimes completely misses it. Every mission we went on with our partner force. They were the people doing most of the jobs on the ground. And part of this book is trying to help reclaim that narrative and tell people what actually happened.
And have you just been under fire before this?
No, this was pretty calm. This is a pretty calm mission, to be honest. We arrived with such an overwhelming force that most people decided not to have a go at us.
But often that wouldn't be the case.
No. Yeah. See, there's little Grosvenor.
Oh.
He was a good boy. And see the lighter uniforms of the partner force, and you'll see them escorting this guy on.
Okay.
Captured, off onto the big flying school bus, and away we go. I give the guys the hands up for how many numbers we have. We confirm, sit away and fly away. I mean, I've got hours and hours and hours of this footage, and it was this footage going back through that really helped to, trigger my brain to some of the missions that we did. But again, the narrative of the story, and there's a fair few chapters in there, is to really help paint the picture. I think I might just pause on that because tonight's also a very poignant night for those who don't know, in the room is Katrina Patterson. Katrina was the mother of Corporal Scott James Smith, who was my one soldier who was killed in Afghanistan on the 21st of October 2012. And Katrina was kind enough to actually lend a beautiful quote on the back of the book. And there's one chapter in particular that I wrote, and I sent it to Katrina and her daughter Roxy to ask for their permission to go into great detail of the day when Scott was killed, into very great detail of the day Scott was killed. And the purpose for that was to not simply have these stories be so up in the air, mythical, but to bring them back down to the realities of what war is and what the cost of conflict is and how incredible the people who served over there and some of the people that we lost. And Scott was an absolute superhero. And if it was a movie, he would be the last character in the movie you would have ever expected to have died. But there were also, in his tragedy, so much inspiration drawn from the way his fellow soldiers fought through to make sure we gathered all of Scott to send him home to Katrina and Roxy and his family, and how he inspired us through not only that 3-day mission, but for the rest of that mission as well. And I say that as well because so many in this room also know that that exact day, the 21st of October, was the exact day that the ABC released their article saying November Platoon was war criminals. And behind the scenes, it's been people like Katrina, who on that night we had conversations saying, what the fuck are we going to do? And my mother, Barbara, and that's the first time tonight they've actually met. So I'm sure you can appreciate the gravity of tonight for me and for them. The inspiration they provided behind the scenes and the fingerprints they and Scott and others have on this book. So I just really want to take a moment to acknowledge that here and now.
Yeah, Katrina, you do us a great honour and you do Scott a great honour by being here. Thank you very much. Yeah. I mean, the stories of your service are incredible. Many of them in the podcast, many more are in the book. That was obviously one of the most devastating moments of your life.
Yeah.
And you do, as you say, go into detail so that we can all see what it's really like over there.
Yeah.
None of us live in this parallel universe that you've experienced, and yet we rely on people like you to protect this universe that we live in. We take it for granted.
Yeah.
We do. Some of the other things you saw and did over there weren't all that serious sometimes. What else?
No, there's also some beautiful moments. I mean, Grove gets an appearance there, but you know, during just one of those deployments, I take you on. There was 67 missions in 5 months. That's outside the wire from 4 hours through to 3 days, and it was just beautiful engagements with the locals and conversations and working with the partner force and I really take you inside all of the diplomacy behind the scenes. In particular, when I was over there, there was the terrible night when the Hekmatullah insider killed 3 Australians, and then within our own task force, Merv and Nate died. And because 5 Australians had died within 24 hours, everyone was put on a pause operation. And then my platoon partnered with Ben Robert Smith and his team, and we had to go out and track down this Hekmatullah. And some of the missions and what occurred has been played out in the federal courts and things like Ben Robert Smith's case. And I really enjoy taking people on behind the scenes of what it was like to be over there when the government said no one is allowed to go outside the wire except for the special forces to hunt this guy down. So more extremes, but then all the way through to just sharing, that's me sharing a cup of chai tea that the lovely girl had brought me, even though she might look a bit unhappy in that picture. But we actually had a fantastic rapport with the locals. We'd turn up to targets and they would tell us who was not meant to be there. We'd be there overnight and they'd be there offering to cook us, chicken. And the best lamb I've ever had in my life was in Afghanistan. And Mum knows I don't like lamb. So just trying to bring more of those real stories to you.
Yeah. And there's a couple of more pictures.
What do we
look
got?
Through here.
What's next? Yeah.
Describe that for us. What are we looking at?
Cold, hard war criminals, apparently. So this was my 26th birthday in Afghanistan, and we were co-located with the Americans, and their postal system was incredible. So we had a Halloween party the week before, but the guys, that's one of my mortars teams, their Care Bear costume didn't arrive in time. So I was sitting out the back having a quiet cup of tea for my birthday, and next thing I was literally crash tackled by 5 commandos in Care Bear costumes. And that's one of the few photos that was snapped from us socialising. Yeah, you know, we were literally a family over there, and there were these incredible moments that I also love to share a few of them with you in the book as well.
Yeah, and you need those moments to remind you of who you are.
Absolutely.
In the face of all this.
I just love it, particularly with what's been portrayed in the media the last few years. I really tried to include some key details in this book to just help bring home the actual human side of who these people were. You know, they're some of the smartest, most empathetic, most emotionally intelligent people you would have ever met because they've been put through such an incredible process like our selection course. Yeah. And that really gravitated through to our operations and what we did over there.
We're going to skip through quickly because there's just so much.
Right.
What are we looking at here?
And I just go back one. I just take you through some of the other aspects. You know, the deploying overseas with the commandos was just simply one part of what we did. You know, here's a picture of a story I tell you where we had to parachute off the coast of Papua New Guinea, assemble these watercraft and drive from Papua New Guinea back to Australia, right the way through to the bottom left when we're on the domestic counter-terrorism role, ready to respond, support things. And I take you through things like the Lint Cafe siege when we were part of that unit as well. And then I take you through some other stories that people don't know about. When I got out, moved to the US, and all of a sudden, most would have remembered there was the Ariana Grande bombing in the US, and a friend of mine just happened to be in charge of a security company and responsible for the Black Eyed Peas. And next thing, I became the head of security for the Black Eyed Peas for their opening performance at the UEFA Grand Final in Cardiff in 2017. Real Madrid and Juventus. I didn't follow football, and there's Ronaldo and all that good stuff. Right the way through to then the Ariana Grande Memorial concert. And I take you through some of the stories of what it was like translating a lot of the skill sets that I thought were just military to everyday life and interactions with these people and that sort of very separate life that Mum knows I've sort of led in the US probably since about 2015 when I was posted over there.
Yeah, and I think you said the Ariana Grande concert bombing was in the US. It was in the UK. I think it was in Manchester.
Yeah, sorry, that was in Manchester, but I was in the US when it happened.
Yes.
Yeah, and the call up.
There's a story I want you to tell about just before you got out, you were on secondment in the US with the Special Forces there, the US Rangers.
Yeah.
And you got to know a lot of these guys, these alpha males, and you went to church with them. They wanted to fix you up with their sisters. And right. Tell us how that unfolded and how that suddenly turned left for you.
It was, 2015 is a really poignant year for me. I got sent on exchange to the US 75th Ranger Regiment for a year in the Special Forces. And prior to that, I would really not associated or connected myself with being gay. I thought it was a phase. All I knew was Oxford Street. It scared me. I didn't have another person in Special Forces that I could sort of see as a mentor in that aspect because there was no one else openly gay or had any hints of that. And I went to the US and in Columbus, Georgia, an hour south of Atlanta, very deep in the south, the only Australian, the first of the posting. And next thing I was hunting deer on the weekend and getting invited to church, and it was very devoutly Christian, very devoutly Southern and all the rest. And it was a unique time because the Rangers, much like Australia, had been tasked to open up their selection courses to women. And it was a very mature conversation. I was really impressed with it. You know, if they can meet the standard, then they're one of us. But I remember, and there's a story I take you through where we had this kind of town hall discussion, and we just brought some of the most senior, aggressive, war-hardened alpha males together to agree on this. And the next thing, and I had just literally the week before, after meeting some people and realising I could be my own brand of gay, called Mum and my sister and told them I was gay and came out to them. The next thing, this, battle-hardened senior NCO stood up and said, "We'll accept women, but we're never going to accept any fucking homosexuals into this unit." And I just wanted to stand up and say, "Well, fuck you, mate." And I sort of realised I'd literally just been hunting with that dude and he wanted to set me up with this chick from church, and it was all fascinating. But it was a really poignant part for me and a journey I like and really try and take people on with the book to just appreciate the difference between that defence is a culture. And the culture is service. It's mission and team before self. Mm-hmm. This is the biggest thing I struggle with, particularly now being proudly gay and all the rest. And even journalists and others who pick up this for the clickbait is, like, "Oh, it must have been so hard to, not be accepted and all the rest." It's like, serving in the military was more important to me than my sexuality. Mm-hmm. My family by choice and the missions I did and being able to deploy to countries where it was illegal to be homosexual and all the rest was more important to me than being personally affirmed as being gay. And that's just that culture. It's very different, a culture of responsibility and selflessness before entitlement and putting yourself first. And the juxtaposition of those two has probably constantly been a struggle in today's society, where sometimes I am fighting the battles where people want to, individualise and recognise those service members who died who were LGBTIQA+, and they fail to appreciate by doing that you're actually doing a disservice to them, because we serve to serve our country and to serve our people, not to be recognised as anything other than human and Australian and veterans, essentially.
Yeah. Looking at this image here, this is when you had started a gym here in Sydney. And, this is when I first met you.
Yes.
When you were doing this.
The Barry's days. That was my sort of entrance back into Sydney, outside of being military. On the left is when we opened Barry's in Singapore, and on the right was just before Blake and I brought Barry's to Australia. And even then, I think, perhaps like many people, this all happened before COVID, and it kind of feels like it's a compartmentalised part of my brain. But even reflecting on this, and there's many people in this room that I met during that as well, it was brilliant. And particularly for me, as I take you through the journey of the book, it was more of that learning of what I had learned and applying it into everyday life and actually achieving great success without holding myself back, thinking like, I don't have a business degree, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that. And again, sort of pushing past some of those imposter syndrome barriers. Yeah,
and then just around that time, 2020, in October, the ABC published the first of several stories. Oh, I've skipped over this.
That's all right. Skip over.
Yeah, I'll skip over this because this is also all at around the same time. But the ABC published the first of a series of stories accusing your unit, November Platoon, of executing a prisoner because there was no room on an evacuation helicopter.
Yes, I think most people know the story now, don't they?
Yeah, they do. A lot of people here do. But that was a life-changing event for you, wasn't it? Not least of which because of the day on which the story dropped.
It was, and I think a key part of the book that I take you through is actually literally 2 months before the ABC published that article, I had a suicidal ideation. I, for the first time, sat there in my apartment and wrote a letter, and had been in a very low period in my life where I'd been made redundant from Barry's. Blake and I had broke up. He'd gone back to the US. COVID had happened. Everyone was very isolated and alone. And I was at a really, really low mental place in my life. And I've gone through this journey, and I've told this story a few times quietly to family members and friends, but it's in this book. And for those, the interesting part was when I actually had the ghostwriter, the prologue and the primary focus of the book started with and focused on that suicidal moment and rebuilding from there. And instead, I've rewritten and completely changed the focus of that book, a focus of the book, which has been my journey the last few years, where that really defined me for a point in time. And I was really worried about my mental health. And I was surrounded by so many mates who have taken their lives from the military, so much more than we lost in combat. And I really thought that was going to be a trajectory that I nearly went down, and a trajectory that I was going to be constantly fighting throughout the rest of my life. But instead, I'm very open with that and trying to make it more relatable and less stigmatized, and removing the shame in myself by just openly talking about it, that it was a low period. It doesn't define me. It's moving on and learning from that. And I guess even in reflection, it was almost, I'm not going to say kind of fortunate, it was just very unique that 2 months later I was given a purpose that hit me at the most intrinsic level. Like I said, on the day where we went to North Bondi RSL to commemorate Scott with Katrina, the ABC published that story. And from going to where I was thinking I didn't have anything to add to society, I was no longer a platoon commander, I'd wake up and my biggest responsibility was to take copper for a walk. And some people love that, but the journey I try and take you on is how hard it is going from leading 30, 40 and 100 people overseas on the most incredible missions to then only having a relevance to take a dog for a walk. It's actually really hard to come back down and to not feel relevant and all the rest. And all of a sudden, that gave me purpose.
Yeah.
My lads looked to me, others looked to me, and I felt a responsibility because as an officer and as a commander, you are taught that you are responsible for your men before, during and after battle. And a lot of the journey I take you on with this, a lot of people know the court battle, and my lionesses of the law are here in the courtroom as well. But there's a lot of the narrative that I'll take you through that really is kind of the behind the scenes of what actually happened and how low it got with some of the dirty tactics and all the rest, parallel with the complete sense of abandonment from those that I used to work for, my bosses in the military. I include the letter I wrote to Peter Dutton, or the response from Peter Dutton when he was Defence Minister, and when the ABC published the dates the incident happened and I wasn't even in Afghanistan, I just asked him to release my deployment record to help me do that. I really enjoy being able to provide a lot more of the meat to this story, to perhaps help take you on more of what that journey was like as well.
We can skip forward to 2023 at the end of the trial, and your lawyers, Sue and Rebecca, are here tonight. When you had that crushing win in the federal court in the defamation case you filed against 2 journalists and the ABC. Was that vindication for you? How did it feel?
Yeah, and again, I'll take you through this in the book, where the difference between, winning in the courtroom and then winning in the court of public opinion, and then there actually being real accountability, or even, the ability to apologise. And
they still haven't apologised to you for those first stories?
No, there's been a lot of semantics around it, and I don't want to get hung up on that too much here, because that unfortunately has become too much of my story. But yeah, I think perhaps one of the most poignant conversations I had was just with someone who recently read the book, and he said to me, "Heston, stop trying to get an apology from someone or something you don't respect." I was like, ooh, that's really good. That's some pretty powerful words to move forward. But yeah, there's a lot, and I don't want to get hung up on that. I'm kind of actually sick of that story, to be honest. But I enjoy being able to provide a lot more of that detail here.
Yeah, and you provide a lot of wisdom, both your own and wisdom you've gained from other people in the book. So yeah, it's a great read in that sense as well.
I think just on that, if we go back one slide, this is actually a picture on the left of my grandfather, Mum's dad, at the end of the Hook in Korea, on the day of Armistice Day when Korea finished. And I only came across his pictures once Granddad died. He died December 2020, just before this book came into conception. And I only knew Papa as the fisherman that he was on the right. And in the book, I actually include this photo, and on the back of the photo, Papa wrote out exactly what was happening in that photo. And it was really enjoyable, and thanks to, I don't know if it was a conversation with you or with someone else who said, use this as an opportunity to include some of your grandfather's history in there as well, because I draw on some of his wisdom.
Yeah, you told me the story.
Yeah. Because he was one, when the ABC article got published, who called me and said, just don't let them treat your soldiers the way they treated mine when they got back from the Vietnam War. So it's been really enjoyable to include perhaps some of my own words of wisdom, but words of wisdom from others who have been there behind the scenes, and who I've tried to also help include in some of the history of this book. Yeah,
we're going to skip forward. A couple of the big things you've achieved, and you've achieved so much, but one of them was the advocacy for the Royal Commission into defence and veteran suicide, which, without your strong advocacy may not have got over the line, and you were there up at Parliament lobbying. What was it like lobbying our politicians to get that over the line from both sides?
I really enjoyed writing about this in the book, because I think you just always think, particularly coming from, this is what I've appreciated and I enjoy taking people through the book, is just how institutionalised I was, particularly going from high school into the military. You're always taught there's a way to do things and the rules and all the rest. And I managed to get myself a Parliament pass and just literally started turning up to the doors of people and started knocking. And then I went in there, and the next thing on the spot, Pauline Hanson's changing a vote for the Royal Commission for us, and this, and the amount of people who, once I actually physically got a meeting with them, not capitulated, but, some of them were good enough to listen. Others, I just got to see the extreme cowardice of so many of the politicians, and how much...
Give us the names.
No, I can't do that. But just seeing, it was fascinating for me, because I, again, come from this institution where those appointed as their politicians are leaders, and have leadership skills or things like that. But I have meetings with their people, and they're looking at their staffers so nervous, and their staffers are literally fresh out of university and have these great documents, but they don't know what's going on. And then I was just holy cow, I can start asserting myself here more, and not intimidating these people, but convincing them to, this is the way, and then using the media, and the media were loving it, and using that as a weapon, and, really getting all the pieces together. And next thing, I literally wrote that motion that I just walked around and got people to sign. And next thing, we got the numbers to push it through the Senate. And the next thing, people like Barnaby Joyce and Lou O'Brien committed to me, like handshake, that they would cross the floor. And literally, a few weeks later, we won the Royal Commission. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, and you had Albo before as Prime Minister, just before, right standing beside you, making speeches.
That's fun part of the book is where you get to see where Heston got very filled with confidence from such success, and all these political parties then asking me to run for Senate for them, then decided to raise his own political party and then got absolutely destroyed by the media and all the rest. So, huge learning curves at the very extremes of, I don't know, everything, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the experience you will have gleaned from that will be invaluable going forward, I'm sure.
Yeah.
As painful as it was to go through that. I mean, it's very hard to start a political party, let alone gain any sort of public attention or traction or, But you gave it a red hot go.
And to be honest, it was the reality check I needed. And I talk about that in this book. Like, I had a head full of steam and I literally thought that I could just take over the place. And, because I honestly felt in that same flow and alignment and bringing all this experience forward. It did teach me some incredible stories about politics and politicians, and then in particular about the media. And in the reflections piece at the end of the book, I go hard. I've really been so disgusted by so much of the media in Australia. Even in writing this book, I've had some media people come out to me and ask to me to give them a summary so they can write about the book without even reading it themselves. And sadly, that's so much. I've written articles for journalists reporting on me. There's this push, I'm not going to steal Denzel Washington's word, but there's this push for just constant content, getting things out. And there's actually been some very small number of journalists along this path that I've actually met who still put in the level of detail and some of the issues that I see in society. I talk about freely in here of how much I believe the media is responsibility for how lazy they are and how much they're not willing to really put in what's required on such important topics.
Yeah, and I know we've got a couple of the journalists here that you've worked with.
There's some good ones here. The good ones are here.
Yeah. So, your story, sorry?
No. You're all right.
Your story gets even better as we go along. And as the book goes along, it gets better to the point where you've created something magical, which is going to help, is already helping a lot of veterans. Yeah. It's going to help a lot more. And I just saw on your Instagram recently you were organising and getting ready for the next event. Tell me what I'm talking about. Yeah,
well, a few good things have come from this. First and foremost, for those who haven't seen it, the ABCs of Heston Russell, this is what Bryan has put together, and it's brilliant. While I'm working on the audio book, it'll still take me a few months. Bryan's done a great work going through this. The Veteran Games is a real key project that I'd like to take you through in the book as well. And it was sort of a big saving grace for me that happened in parallel to all this legal stuff with the ABC court case. And even in writing this book, Sam would know the last couple of years, I've really worried if even me being a part of the Veteran Games and running it has been more of a detraction from it, given the experiences I've had in politics and media and the people I've gotten offside. But even as a part of writing this book and rereading this book myself, it's given me even more purpose to push on with that.
Yeah, and what is the Veteran Games?
The Veteran Games, during this whole phase and stage when I got to my low points, I really craved some ability to connect back to the veteran community. The Royal Commission reported that loss of purpose, loss of community, and loss of identity were key factors that led to mental ill health and suicidality, and that the highest actual demographic of veterans taking their own lives is young men under the age of 40. And so much of that is because the veteran support system is skewed towards those with extreme injuries. Invictus is incredible at what it does for seriously injured and ill people and getting them back to adaptive sports. And our older veterans have excellent support. But it's people like me who are still physically able and who are just struggling with adapting back into everyday life that otherwise were putting service before self and removing themselves from the equation as opposed to putting themselves forward. So the Veteran Games is designed to specifically target all of those issues, to get veterans to reach out, form their own team of 8 to 10, train up with purpose, and then come together to compete in military-styled events. So I think obstacle courses, casualty evacuations, all the rest. And we're about to kick off our third iteration this October.
Fantastic, mate.
Have a look.
Bring it. Let's go.
So the practice we're going to do today is called convergence breathing. Kicked off with some breathing. I've had an ice bath. Body's feeling good. Yeah, this is going to be a good day, I think.
And in first place, receiving the Perpetual Shield, $10,000 first prize, and the championship coin, Team Tropic Thunder.
Wow, you did that. Well done, mate.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a passion project moving forward. And again, as I'm sure most people can appreciate, the hardest part about writing your own memoir is how to finish it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it provided me with lots of opportunities to reflect on what I wanted to do moving forward, and also to use the book as an opportunity to make that statement and make that dedication publicly as well in what I want to do. I had a lot of enjoyment writing this book, and even the ebook, where I could actually go through and hyperlink things, and there's a lot of ways that people can physically get involved in some of these projects and additional campaigns, and or even just find more information about stuff I said if they want to fact truth it themselves, and using the book to be able to have people go and choose their own adventure after that. So, and the Veteran Games is definitely one of those passion projects, and also I helped to paint the picture of how it's perhaps helped me in forming the project as well. I think in particular, the name of the book wasn't what it finally rested at, Forging the Will to Fight, until the very last week before publishing it. And so much of the story that I like to take you through is, a lot of people talk about finding the will to fight, but so much of this story is about just appreciating, you can't control what happens to you, but you can, how it impacts and shapes you, and then your will to push on and how you use that. And a lot of the fights have been some that I've picked, and there've been some that have come to me, and it's how you sort of decide to face those and use them to move on. Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on, my mindset is constantly focused on what can I learn from this and push forward and teach to others. And I hope that comes through in the book as you read it as well. Shame and stigma. The biggest things I try and write about in this book are about shame and stigma, and just really trying to appreciate, I made this comment before, and even with another mate here tonight, I'm feeling kind of in this phase where I feel like I'm going through this unlearning and relearning so much of what I thought was real and what I thought wasn't, and appreciating how we're brought up, how we go through school, then those of us who go into institutions like the military shapes our thoughts and emotions. And if I had my time again, it's really trying to go back and tell anyone who can from a younger age just how much to go into things with your own eyes and ears open, and not just so readily take on what others tell you and what are the shames or stigmas around you, to try and think about why someone's that way. I remember even battling with my own sexuality and the rest. I was probably the most homophobic person I knew because it didn't match the masculine version of this. And, even going overseas to Afghanistan, and, it's so easy to see the enemy as the enemy and be hateful, but it's like, hey, you're just one side. They're fighting for their own reasons, and their will to fight is strong, and they feel justified in what they're doing. It's not good versus evil. There's just all these different ways. So in the book, I have this saying that I love. It's like, have a destructive mindset in the most constructive way. When you see something, try and deconstruct and understand why, and then reconstruct it in a way that brings people together, as opposed to implement shame and stigma for being different, if that makes sense. Yeah. Makes more sense in the book. Cool.
You won't like this. At the beginning of this year, I happened to go into St Vincent's Hospital. It was something that I didn't know was forthcoming, but I had tripped and fallen over, and my head had taken quite a banging. This bloke helped me out.
For those who don't, so Nick, this is Nick. Everyone meet Nick. Nick flew helicopters in Vietnam. He won a distinguished flying cross as a 20-year-old flying special forces in Vietnam, and then won an Air Force cross, saving people, hovering his Huey, picking them up in the floods in northern New South Wales. and we connected just a month ago. And Nick lives just up there in King's Cross, and we discovered each other just a month ago. And then on his way to watch the Mardi Gras parade, he happened to fall backwards and put himself in hospital. So we got the opportunity to connect Nick with the RSL, with all these other support services that a gentleman like himself didn't really have connection with, and happy to have him here tonight.
That happened.
You all right?
All happened. And I think I might have fixed the problem. I think it's gone away.
Good.
Thank you so much,
Happy to
Nick,
hear.
and thank you for coming
Thank you,
tonight
Nick.
and sharing that with us. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Heston, thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your memoir, your life story with us. Thank you so much for coming to the launch of Heston Ross's memoir.
How's it going? Right.